Good morning again. Hi on Zoom. So I want to teach today on the Ignatian way, and I want to make it very clear. Saint Ignatius of Loyola lived around the 1500s, and so I'm not just departing from the 1500s. I think our text very much speaks into the Ignatian way. So I'm not going to be preaching on the text, but just to say that I think in many ways it describes what Saint Ignatius of Loyola came to understand. So, first of all, I'm calling this re-enchanting our faith. I just love that phrase, re-enchanting, because I think there's a huge need for it in our world and in the church. I think our faith has lost a lot of the enchantment that we used to have. So what do I mean by that? I mean recovering the art of living in a reality that we cannot access with our five senses. Nevertheless, it is nonetheless real, and it's even more real. And prior to the Enlightenment, which happened, 1800s, was called the Age of Reason, right? Descartes, I think, therefore I am. And our existence became one of a brain on a stick, right? Where which isn't, the brain isn't bad, reason's important, but it became kind of the focus. And before that, people assumed they lived in a world of fairies, witches, goblins, ghosts, spirits, angels, leprechauns. And once a year on Halloween, we still go back there, don't we? Just for old time's sake. But there is still something in us that longs for this, as evidenced by the Enchanted Forest. Those of you that have driven between, Sycamoose and Revelstoke, have you guys been there? I've never been there, but I just so long to go. I never have time, right? But I was looking on the website, and it's very, very popular. And I think I know why. Because it kind of brings back that reality. And of course, that's why we love fantasy, right? Some of us. Lord of the Rings, Narnia. I think these guys, Tolkien and Lewis and Williams, they were called the Inklings, right? They used to hang out in a pub in Oxford there. Kirsten's been there lots. You've been there? You drank there? Huh? The Eagle and Child, yeah. The Bird and Baby. Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting that so much good stuff came out of that pub. But due to the Enlightenment, this imagination, this reality of enchantment was lost, and we entered the age of reason where if you can't access it with your senses, it's not true. Our Christian faith, it really affected our Christianity. The Protestant Reformation came out of that, and the Protestant Reformation became very cerebral. Christianity became about believing the right things, the right doctrine, the right behavior, which has now become the right political party, the right side of the culture wars. I think that's the inevitable result when we default. So our reality became what we can hear, see, taste, touch, smell, and we bow to what the mystic James Finley calls the idolatry of circumstance, where we allow our circumstances to determine our reality. This is what's true. But actually, it's not what's true. It's part of what's true, but there's more, right? So Karl Rahner, Catholic mystic, theologian, wrote in 1981 in his book, Concern for the Church, the Christian of the future will be a mystic or not exist at all. I think he saw into our time. And there's a fellow by the name of Carl McColman who wrote the big book on Christian mysticism. He writes, and I heard him say this in a webinar, mystics are not a special kind of Christian. Every Christian is a special kind of mystic. So it's kind of like what Sanda was referring to with Evangeline. We're all mystics, but we're different in how we respond. And I think some of us feel we're not mystical because we're not like this person. But each of us has personality and ways that we respond to God and others that are mystical. They're God encounters. Paul, he was quite a mystic, wasn't he? He said it this way: so we fix our eyes not on what is seen, but on what is unseen, since what is seen is temporary, but what is unseen is eternal. Now, unfortunately, Christians and Gnosticism have construed that to mean that what we see isn't important, and what is unseen is eternal, is the next life, and that's not what Paul is talking about at all. He's talking about the fact that we are living in a reality now where the unseen is actually more real. That the physical is actually a shadow, not in a platonic way where it's not real and inferior, but it's kind of like C.S. Lewis in The Great Divorce when he describes heaven. He talks about everything so weighty, the weight of glory. It's like there's substance. And so this other world is not out there, it's right here. But the kingdom of God is here right now. That's why I can have hope in spite of the events of this past week. The kingdom of God is here. God reigns. And that seems like a mockery, doesn't it? It seems like ridiculous. But how do you see what you can't see? What organ do you need in your body if you to see what is not seen? You need another organ, not this one, although we're getting this one working, aren't we, Tay? How do you see what is unseen? You need an organ, and faith needs an organ. So we could call it learning to see with our heart. Speaking of the Enlightenment, this guy was in the Enlightenment, Blaise Pascal, but he understood enough to know the heart has its reasons that reason knows nothing of. So the organ is our heart. And Pascal valued the brain. He didn't unplug his brain. He was a brilliant mathematician. So he valued reason, but he knew its limits. And it doesn't mean that our senses aren't important. They are. They actually are a gateway if we know how to operate them. They are a gateway to a greater reality. So we don't deny our senses. They're important. And there's a beautiful interaction. A few days after the smoke had lifted in Soyuz, we'd been there about 3 days in the summer, and you've seen pictures I've shown you of what it was like before and after. And one of those days after, when the smoke had lifted, I was walking along the lake shore at Ignatian campground, and I had just read in the book of Hebrews that morning about angels. And I was reminded that angels are around us all the time, but we forget. And I've told you a few of the encounters I've had. I had a significant encounter with an angel one time on the way to Lower Post. But they come in disguise, right? They're usually undercover. So I just thought, oh, Lord, that is so, you know how it says in Hebrews, right? That they're sent as to minister to the heirs of salvation. I said, Lord, just help me to remember. Your angels are with me. And so I'm on this walk along the lake shore, and I saw this woman walking 3 dogs, and she was very tattooed. Kind of striking, kind of caught my attention. So I walked by her, and as I looked beyond, I saw, this was along the lake shore at Ignatian campground, I saw this child with an adult interacting, and then all of a sudden, I don't know where the adult went, but the child started walking towards me. And the child was about this big. And they started walking towards me, and I'm a Canadian, so if somebody's walking towards me, I go to the right side so they can pass, right? That's Canada. Sometimes I have to explain that to people. But this child would not in any way go with that. They were coming right towards me. So finally, being Canadian, I acquiesced and said, okay, I'm going to go to the left. Within a few meters, that child just looked at me with this just steady look. And with about where Veronica is, they lifted their hand like this. And I went, that is so strange. So I didn't know what else to do, so I just lifted my hand too. And they gave me a high five. It was just this firm high five. Yeah. And I walked about this far, and then I thought, what I read this morning. And I turned around and they were gone. And I did. I felt goosebumps. I just went, it was the same as that what happened in Lower Post. After the dude started my car, I turned around to say thank you, and he was gone. Right? So that's what I mean by the interaction between our senses and the unseen. That our senses still are important, but it's realizing there's more than what we just see with our physical eyes. And all I got, that only message I got was, it was the Lord saying, just keep going. You know? It's kind of like those beach volleyball games where they give each other a high five after they get a point. The game's not over yet, but good shot. It's kind of how it felt. So let me introduce you to this dude, Ignatius of Loyola. He was born in 1491. And I believe he has a lot to say about re-enchanting our faith. And he's tools, okay? These are tools that we can learn from different aspects of the body of Christ. With 6 companions, he founded the Society of Jesus, or as we commonly know them today, as the Jesuits and Order of the Catholic Church. And he was born in Loyola, Spain, hence his name, Ignatius of Loyola. As a young man, he took up dancing. And maybe just for our Zoom folks, we could just turn the screen off for a bit, just so they can get the full view, because I think I'm a little thing up in the corner there. That would be great. I'll come back to the PowerPoint in a few minutes. He was captivated by the military. He took up dancing, fencing, gambling, dueling, and pursuing women. And he was driven by this desire to be famous, inspired by the readings of Knights of Camelot, El Cid, and the Song of Roland, tales of romantic chivalry. He joined the army at the age of 17, and he would strut around with his cape flying to reveal his sword and dagger and fancy boots and clothing. He was stubborn, arrogant, hot-tempered, and sensitive to insult. And he often committed crimes that his privileged status would help him get away with. And he worked his way up the ranks in the army, and after many battles, got pretty highly promoted. But in May 1521, at the age of 30, he suffered a severe injury while fighting to defend the city of Pamplona against a French attack. There was just wars all over the place. I mean, it was just, did you know that there's actually, in spite of the headlines this week, there's actually way less killing and way less wars today than there's ever been in history, per capita. It is going down. But, you know, we're on social media. We just see the bad stuff, right? So he worked his way up the ranks in the army, and he suffered this injury fighting in this battle, and a cannonball ricocheted off a nearby wall, severely injuring his right leg. He was returned to his father's castle in Loyola, where in an era before anesthetics, get ready to cringe, he underwent several operations to repair the leg, with his bones set and rebroken. I just say, hit me with a hammer, man. In the end, the operation left his right leg shorter than the other, and he would walk with a limp for the rest of his life. His military career over. Never trust somebody without a limp, right? His long convalescence gave him plenty of time to reflect and think about his life. He was a keenly observant young guy, and his talent for noticing or taking note became the cornerstone of his approach to spirituality and living an enchanted spirituality. He missed his romance novels and tales of chivalry and fighting, but the castle was very orthodox. So the only books that were available were the Life of Christ and Lives of the Saints. So he read these books. And he was struck by what he began to notice. See, there it is again, what he noticed inside. And he noticed that he was strangely inspired and stimulated to love and for God. And he got a term for that. He called it consolation when he felt that. By contrast, as he recalled the stories of romantic love and adventure and chivalry, he felt restless and discontented. And he coined a term for that called desolation. And he noticed that daydreaming about one, he felt closer to God, and daydreaming about the other, he felt momentary stimulation, but then felt that these emotions had taken him away from God. And it was in his convalescence that he had this complete encounter with the love of God. Lying on a sick bed, anybody ever been there? In pain, crippled, agitated, he realized that there was nothing he could do to earn God's love, but there was this act of love of God that was pouring into him. And that this act of love was God's most outstanding quality. As John wrote, God is love, loving and giving. As Sandra said about Evangeline, God created us, willed us. It was love that did that. That's what he began to realize, laying there, and he can't move. You were such an incredible idea in God's mind. You have to exist. That's the will. It's love. That's why you're here. That's what he came to understand laying there in that sick bed. Reminds me of the story Richard Rohr tells about this nun who worked in a hospice, and what she found, almost 100% across the board of all the people, she spent the last 6 months of people's lives with them. That's your job. Spend the last 6 months of people's lives with them. And he said that 100%, every one of them fell in love with God because they found that God loved them unconditionally, and there was nothing they could do. They couldn't make any vows. They couldn't say, well, I'll do this. God just loves me. And she said the only people that had the hard time with that were, guess who? Religious people. Because we've been so trained to think of God and hell and wrath and performance, right? But it eventually broke through for most of them too. Well, I wish I could say it was all good for Ignatius. However, for the next 20 years, he suffered many severe trials. Anybody relating? You know, even though you encounter God, how many know it's not like a before and after thing? My life was sucked, now it's great. And that didn't happen with him either. He experienced failure, dead ends, disappointments, setbacks, sickness. He was arrested by his own church. That is one of the greatest pains that you suffer when you follow Jesus, is when your peers in the faith think you're a heretic. I've been on both sides of that. And that is what religion does. He suffered a severe spiritual darkness that was so great, he was sometimes tempted to take his own life. In addition, the whole known world was in chaos. Europe was reeling from the Protestant Reformation. And rather than it being a spiritual revival, it engendered the religious wars. God. I'm Legore. Why was Legore German-speaking immigrants to the U.S.? Because we were French Huguenots running from the persecution of France. What is that? The worst 2 world wars in human history were fought in so-called Christian nations. In addition to these religious wars, the monasteries were becoming obsolete as the feudal system was dying. People were swarming into this, from agrarian existence into cities. And there was this seismic shift. You know, we think we're the only people that live in a time of change. My gosh, the changes that they had to go through. So Ignatius adapted. He was uneducated, so he went back to school for 11 years. And during his school years, he formed the Society of Jesus with a small group of friends. Rather than it being cloistered monastic movement, it became a movement in community, but engaged with the culture, serving the people whom we know today, and we know them as the Jesuits. And the foundation of Jesuit spirituality and mysticism is this. First of all, it's communal. In other words, a lot of mysticism, you know, you get this idea of a hermit, and there is a legitimate movement of hermetics through history, especially Eastern Orthodox and some in the Western Catholic tradition. So there is a place for them. But the vision for the Ignatians was communal. Secondly, they were attentive to God's unceasing initiatives of love. By the way, speaking of communal, do you know what I heard this week? There are 2 countries in the world, England and Japan, who now have a minister of loneliness in their government. That the loss of social capital is so severe in our culture. And of course, it was there before COVID, but COVID just made it worse, where now we're just scared to be with each other. We're always playing it so safe that we just stay away from each other. And it's not just affecting churches, it's affecting the whole society. It's affecting how we get together. We were talking about that in pre-service prayer with Lynn. Canadians, yeah, let's get together sometime, right? Oh yeah, are you talking about the coming kingdom, or? Yeah. So, attentive to God's unceasing initiatives of love towards us. And thirdly, a life of service for the world. And the impact on the world has been phenomenal. Now, the Jesuits, like any other part of the body of Christ, haven't done everything right. But they only ran one residential school in all of the residential schools, and it was a bad one. But they, for the most part, advocated for the rights of indigenous people, especially in South America. And there are some famous Jesuits you may be surprised to know. How many know this guy? Who's that? Good try. Henry Nouwen. Did you know he was a Jesuit? He's more read by Protestants than most Protestants. He's Catholic, Jesuit, incredible. Anytime I'm down or feeling disconnected from God, I just pull out something from Henry Nouwen. Wonderful. There's another surprise for you. Here's another Jesuit. Did you guys know he's Jesuit? I thought he was Franciscan. No, he named himself Pope Francis after St. Francis, because St. Francis inspired him, and St. Francis really inspired the Jesuits. Ignatius of Loyola was very inspired by the life of St. Francis. So you can see they've had a real impact. And by the way, he's the first Jesuit pope in history. In fact, there was about 50 years, did you know the Jesuits were actually pretty much excommunicated from the Catholic Church, as well as made illegal in Spain, France, many countries. They were made illegal. Many of them had to renounce their vows because they had nowhere to go. So there was a price there. So it begins with a vision. So try to wrap this up. Ignatius had this view that a right vision was critical to our spiritual life. Did you know that today, he wouldn't have known this, but they've discovered today that the eye is actually an extension of the brain. It just grows right out of the brain. So the eye is not just about what you see, it's how you see. It actually not just determines what you're seeing, but your state. And Jesus talked about that. Be careful how you see. The whole understanding of life. And so, this sounds like cliche, but understand the heart of this from Ignatius. You know, people say, when I see, I will believe, and Ignatius would say, I believe, therefore I see. But that was his posture. And so if you think the world is a bleak place, full of evil, greedy, selfish people who have no love of God or each other, that is how you will see the world. If that's what you think, if that's what your brain is seeing the world. If you think the world is full of goodness and opportunity, a place that God sustains and loves, then that's what you'll find. So there's a vision, first of all, for life, of God coming to us. That God is coming to us always in gifts of creation. That God is always initiating towards you in love. You are loved. As I said, love made you. Love willed you. Love desired you. You exist because you're such a great idea in the heart of God. You have to exist. And that existence wasn't just kind of a one-off. That love is continually being poured into you. God is pouring into you. God is not absent. He's coming to you. God is coming to you through creation, through your loved ones, through your body, through that pew you're sitting on right now. God is coming to you through that nice sleep you had last night. And if you didn't have a nice sleep, that bed you got to sleep, lay on, that you didn't have to have that insomnia out on the street somewhere. God is constantly coming to you in love. This is how God has loved you. Tay described a sunset he saw with Flo last week, and I just love the look on his face as he was describing that sunset over on Spanish Banks. I could just see God just hugging Tay and Flo as they just enjoy this incredible sun. The wildflowers. This morning as I walked, oh my gosh, I was weeping. The colors, the autumn colors, the wood smoke, the fresh smell after the rain. It rained all night. I love Vancouver because it stopped when I got up. Oh, I feel hugged by God when I get out, walk. Maybe you can't walk, but get somebody to take you out, walk. Be outside. It's such a gift. The wildflowers, the birds. I talked to the crows. I rescued a worm today. I did. He was stuck. Or she. I'm not sure it was he or she. But he was stuck. Rescued. And as I put that worm back in the dirt, I felt like the Lord say, thank you. I felt God's tenderness. Remember what one of the Franciscans said, that the way you treat one thing is how you treat everything. I know once in a while you got to go, I know. But I mean, it's just your posture, right? Secondly, a work vision for work. I love the way the Ignatians say this. They say, Jesus is our King, and he has called us to join in his work. He is a leader with ambitious plans. I want to overcome all diseases, all poverty, all ignorance, all oppression, all slavery. That's what we're about. And whoever wishes to join me in this undertaking must be content with the same drink, food, clothing, and so on that comes with following me. Note that there's first of all the call to be with him. It's not just doing stuff for him. But secondly, it's a call to work with him. It's his work. It's his work. Gosh, this sounds so vineyard. Here, I thought we were so original. You know, we figured this out 30 years ago. This is 500 years ago. Dang it. Jesus said, I only do what I see the Father doing. And then finally, a vision of love. God first loves us, and we love. All that we do is just love from the love that we've been given. That's all. If you revel in God's delight, you're going to see it in others. It's just going to flow out of you, right? And so how do we see? Ignatius believed that the original sin was ingratitude. He said it was the cause and the beginning. This is a strong statement. It was the cause, the beginning, the origin of all evil and sins. That is really strong. I wish I had this for last week, for Thanksgiving Sunday. It would have been a good one. But you know what? I'm glad I didn't, because Thanksgiving Sunday, Schmanksgiving Sunday, I think every day is Gratitude Day, right? But what he means is that Adam and Eve have been given the whole world of wonder and beauty to enjoy, and where do we find them? In the garden. In front of the one thing they didn't have access to, the tree of knowledge. So and you just see this through the writings of Paul and the prayers in the New Testament. They're just full of gratitude. God is my witness, how that night and day I do not cease to give thanks, making mention of you in my prayer. And I don't think it was some kind of wooden, thank you, God. I think it was a posture. It was a posture of noticing how much we are loved and cared for by God, and in turn respond by living a life of gratitude. This is a great quote. People usually consider walking on water in thin air a miracle. But I think the real miracle is not to walk on water or in thin air, but to walk on earth. Every day we are engaged in a miracle that we don't recognize. Blue sky, white clouds, green leaves, dark, curious eyes of a child, and 2 eyes. All is a miracle. Who's that? Who quoted that? Oh, I wish I could say it was St. Francis. I wish I could say it was Ignatius of Loyola. Oh, I wish I could say it was Martin Luther. Oh, gosh, I wish I could say it was John Wimber. Sorry, folks. Buddhist. Oh, my gosh. What are we coming to? But all truth is God's truth. It's true, isn't it? Is this true? It's true. And so the conclusion for the Ignatian Way is an invitation to communal and service-oriented mysticism, to sustain us with a vision for life, work, and love. So for our communion, and this is kind of an informal communion today. Not even quite sure how we're going to pull it off, but we will. I just feeling a desire to do this more, and I'll tell you why. I'm becoming aware from Celtic spirituality, and Celtic spirituality is a special spirituality of mysticism, and the reason is it kind of escaped the Roman Greek world and has its own kind of approach to the divine. And they had this belief in thin places. You ever heard that term? Thin places is where, remember we talked about the unseen and the seen? It's where the barrier gets really thin, like that. And there's 3 ways it happens. Number 1, I think there's thin places at Walmart. Just kidding. I think Matt and I were at a thin place this week up on the North Shore. When I walk up in Lynn Canyon, there's a thin place because you know why? No more cell phone connection. And all the years I see all these warning signs about bears and mountain lions, and in all the years I've been there, I haven't seen one. They've seen me. But I just would rather be there. And I just feel hugged by God. Hugged in God's creation. So I think that's a thin place for us that God naturally provided. But there's human-made thin places as well. Like I think the El Camino is not human-made, but it's human-recognized. The walks, I think that's a thin place. I think that's a place where there is something about the pilgrimages and the Irish pilgrimages and the Celtic pilgrimages. There's something about those. There's different places. Tate just tells me these beautiful stories about people that just walk in and look at this building and they're just overwhelmed by it. They're blessed by it. Have you ever wondered why in the last few weeks, I've heard stories of people walking into our building and they just start weeping when they walk in. I think this is a thin place. I think it's just been generations of people who have followed Jesus. Not perfectly, but have made this a place to meet with God. It's a thin place. And finally, Oh, I think there's times. I mean, the church believed that there are certain times in the year that was a thin place, like All Saints' Day, November the 1st, was a thin place. It's where, there's just the barrier between the seen and the unseen gets a little less. And so they honored that day. Of course, Halloween came out of that. Hallowed evening came out of that. The Christian side of it, anyway. But I also believe that another thin place are the sacraments. I believe water, baptism, a thin place. I believe communion, where we are reminded of how we are loved, how God has poured out God's love for us, is a thin place. So let's just stop for a moment. Can I ask you to just take a few minutes just to notice how has God come to you in your life and loved you tangibly? What are some significant thin places where this has happened? And to do the Ignatian examine, what we would do is we would just start from now and work our way back for the last 24 hours. So, like I said, walking in, maybe seeing the smile of a sister or friend or brother, that the face lit up to see you when you walked in, hug of a loved one, beauty of the autumn, that bed you slept on last night, that warm house. Yeah, I know there's pain. As I said last week, gratitude does not contradict lament. Lament and gratitude go side by side. They don't cancel each other out. That's the reality we're in. We're not talking about denial here, but we're just talking about seeing what's unseen. You were willed into existence by love. You will always, Paul said, be. Nothing can separate. Scientists tell us that you're sitting on more space right now than you are substance. The molecules and atoms that you are sitting on, there's more space than substance. What holds you up? Paul says in Colossians 1, we're held together by love, by Christ. We're held by love, by Christ. Come, Holy Spirit, let us see afresh. Would you touch our eyes to see how you've loved us and are loving us? Always, unceasingly. It never stops, even in suffering, even in grief. Would you just come and give each person here today just a warm hug? Just whisper in their ear, all will be well. All will be well. The story's not finished. All will be well. I hope that's a helpful beginning for introduction for Ignatian spirituality. It's not new for us. We've been swimming in it for quite a while. My whole spiritual direction training, I didn't realize, was based on Ignatian practice. Found out I've been taking a course in the last few weeks, and I went, oh, okay. That's where this came from. So a lot of what we do, it's amazing. It's providing a vehicle. It's not perfect, but it's providing a vehicle for people across denominations, across differences, to actually talk to each other. So next Sunday, we're going to be having a congregational meeting, what we call a spiritual conversation. And this is based on an Ignatian model it sounds very much like the Quakers, actually. And so what we're going to be doing is we're going to be, after we have a little bit of a financial update and a little bit of a update on our church in general with some Q&A, we want to give some space next Sunday for this spiritual conversation. And I've sent out an email that kind of prepares you for that. If you didn't get that, please let Tay know, or me know, let one of us know. So that'll just help prepare you. And we're just going to have a time where we take 2 or 3 minutes each just to share at a feeling level where we're at with regards to our church. And then what we'd like to do is just kind of, and that, as people are sharing, that's where we're going to practice noticing, okay? We're just going to practice noticing. And then we're going to give a second round where we share that. And then finally, we'll just have some open conversation about themes that are emerging. And I just believe it's the way that the voice of the Spirit leads through the voice of the community, as every person has a voice. I think that's just kind of the genius of the Ignatian practice. At the back, on the back is a little simple outline of how to pray the examen. I found a great one for dads. I'm going to send that to the dads in our church, because there's all kinds of ways they adapt it to different situations in people's lives. But this is kind of a general introduction of how you can take 10, 15 minutes in a day, at the end of your day. For me, I like to do it in the morning and just do an examen. And it explains pretty much along the lines of what I've already talked